The Committee on Appropriations and Adjudication calls this public hearing to order. It is now 10 minutes after 1 on Thursday, November 1st, 2018. Present with me today is, to my right, Acting Speaker Therese Terlahi, and my left is Senator Regine Bisco-Lee. The purpose of this public hearing is to receive testimony on the following bills. Bill number 366-34, introduced by myself, which is an act to appropriate $3,500,000 from the Healthy Futures Fund balance as of the end of fiscal year 2018 to the Department of Public Health and Social Services as the local matching requirement for the Medicaid program in fiscal year 2019. Also, Bill number 354-34LS, introduced by myself. It's an act to transfer $700,000 from the annual community contribution of the Guam Economic Development Authority that the Guam Economic Development Authority receives from the Guam Healthcare Development, Inc., doing business as the Guam Regional Medical City, to the Department of Administration for deposit into the Healthy Futures Fund, and to appropriate that $700,000 to the Department of Public Health and Social Services as the local matching requirement for the Medicaid program. And finally, Bill number 310-34LS, introduced by Senator Regine Bisco-Lee, which is an act to transfer $300,000 from the annual community contribution the Guam Economic Development Authority receives from the Guam Healthcare Development, Inc., doing business as Guam Regional Medical City, to the Department of Administration for deposit into the Healthy Futures Fund, and to appropriate $300,000 to the Department of Public Health and Social Services for the sole purpose of funding the Child Protective Services Division. Notice of this afternoon's public hearing was provided to senators, stakeholders, and the local media outlets via electronic format on Wednesday and on Monday, October 29th, thus meeting the requirements of the open government law. The committee will continue to receive written testimony for the next 10 days, so please address testimonies to the office of Senator Thomas C. Atta, Chairperson, Committee on Appropriation and Adjudication. Testimonies can be delivered to the mailboxes here at the legislature or emailed to coaa.staff@guamlegislature.org. So with that, we're going to go ahead and start with the first bill, and that's Bill 366-34. And that's the appropriation of $3.5 million from the Healthy Futures Fund balance as of the end of fiscal year 2018 to the Department of Public Health and Social Services as the local matching requirement for the Medicaid program. The fiscal year 2018 Budget Act estimated Healthy Futures Fund revenues of $27.9 million and fully appropriated the same amount. According to the Bureau of Budget and Management Research Special Revenue Fund Tracking Report, as of the end of September 2018, the actual Healthy Futures Fund revenue collections was reported to be $33 million. I understand that Public Law 34-124 appropriated $1.5 million from the Healthy Futures Fund revenues in fiscal year 2018 for Typhoon Mangkhut relief efforts. So Bill 366 appropriates the actual revenues collected in excess of what was adopted in the fiscal year 2018 budget towards Medicaid program. So with that, I would like to ask Ed, were you going to testify? And Eric, you can go ahead and come up forward. And I also want to note that we have received written testimony from the Department of Public Health and Social Services, and they support the Bill 366-34, the appropriation of the for $3.5 million. And basically, they've stated that with these supplemental funds, they are anticipating to acquire an additional $9 million of federal funds for a total of $13.2 million with local funds. We'll go ahead then, and we'll start with you, Ed.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Senators. My name is Edward Byrne. I am Director at Department of Administration. I would like to thank this committee for the invitation to provide testimony on Bill 366. Medical payments are, when taken together with federal matching funds, in the top tier of disbursements made by the government of Guam. They support the medical requirements of those who cannot afford or simply do not have commercial medical insurance and do not qualify for Medicare. For most medical providers, Medicaid payments, and most such providers do accept Medicaid, represent a significant contribution to their revenues, which enable them to continue to provide medical care. It is therefore important that adequate funding be allocated to pay for claims when submitted on a timely basis. These payments cover medical and dental services, prescription drugs, lab and radiology facilities, and some patient equipment. There are 4 main programs with a local funding requirement, which vary from 0 to 45%. The largest of these programs has a fiscal 2019 budget allocation of $13.1 million. Based on trends projected by Department of Public Health and Social Services, local matching requirement for fiscal 2019 claims will be $28.2 million. However, a further $5 million requirement because of the carryover from fiscal 2018 represents an additional requirement commensurate with DPHS's estimate of total Medicaid expenses of $126 million, and that includes the matching. The amount appropriated under fiscal 2019 budget is $13.3 million, less than that available for Medicaid payments in fiscal 2018. As in 2018, a shortfall potentially leads to an increase in unpaid billings as the year progresses. Claims which exceed appropriated levels cannot be processed, but they are nonetheless receivables so far as the provider is concerned. Department of Administration is cognizant of the need for timely payments to Medicaid providers, since these payments impact the services provided to patients. The bulk of processing time is taken up with validation at DPHS. DOA receives batches, usually weekly, and submits these for federal matching. When federal funds have been received, vendor payments take place the following week, as disbursement is required within 3 days receipt of federal funds. DOA relies upon a steady and manageable flow of submitted batches, as the variability and need for local matching can quickly affect cash planning. Availability of local matching funds is thus critically important to keep Medicaid funds flowing and providers paid for services. If funding limits are exceeded, the entire process stops, and that is essentially what happened at the end of fiscal 18, and which also created an immediate impact on fiscal 19. DOA considers Bill 366-34 as a step to bridging the expected shortfall. The Healthy Futures Fund has an available fund balance of $10.5 million at the end of fiscal 18, on fiscal 2018 revenues of $33 million. And I think these figures tie with what you just said, Mr. Chairman. For fiscal 19, healthy fund appropriations total $41.4 million. Although higher revenues from total taxes are anticipated from the new rates, these revenues, plus the available balance, will account for the new $44.9 million, including any new appropriation which this bill permits, as the fiscal 19 level of appropriations. Any residual local funding for the Medicaid program must be found in other revenue streams. Based on the estimates I outlined earlier, in order to avoid an unfunded carryover due to much federal funding expiring on September 30th, 2019, an additional $5 million in local matching funds must be considered. Guam Economic Development Authority will or has addressed the provisions of Bills 354 and 310. Thank you for the opportunity of appearing at this hearing.
Thank you, Chairman Nada and Senators. I'm commenting as well on Bill number 366-34. Guam Regional Medical City supports this bill because it will provide much needed local funding of $3.5 million for the Medicaid program, which will then result in access to the 55% federal match of approximately $4.3 million, totaling an impact of $7.8 million in additional resources for Medicaid. It is critical to provide supplemental funding to the Medicaid program because the fiscal 2019 budget for Medicaid was recently cut by approximately $19 million in order to provide a direct subsidy to Guam Memorial Hospital Authority. The budget for local Medicaid support now amounts to about $13 million. The reduction of the $19 million in local funding also resulted in the corresponding loss of the 55% federal match of $23.2 million, totaling an overall reduced Medicaid budget of $42.2 million. Though the additional $7.8 million of combined local and federal funds for Medicaid resulting from this bill will help somewhat, Medicaid funding will still be short by $34.4 million from what was originally budgeted, including the 55% match. In a Pacific Daily News article dated September 22, 2018, titled "GMH Subsidy Means Less Local Money for Medicaid," the Public Health Chief of Human Services Administrator, Ms. Tess Archangel, stated that, quotes, "The reduced Medicaid budget will likely lead to delayed payments to providers and, as a result, providers refusing to accept Medicaid clients, an increase in the use of the more costly emergency room, and an increase in inpatient admissions. If this bill becomes law, it will help mitigate some of this risk." This bill also helps address the even greater challenge of fully utilizing Guam's remaining Affordable Care Act, we'll call it ACA, grant monies before the expenditure deadline in late 2019. At which time any unspent ACA funds must be returned to the federal government. Section 2005 of the ACA provided an additional federal funds of $268.3 million to support the Guam Medicaid program, and these funds have been available for access between July 2011 and September 2019. Section 1323 of the ACA provided an additional $24.4 million to the Guam Medicaid program, which is available between July 2011 and December 2019. However, Guam is still responsible for generating the 45% local match before the ACA funds can be withdrawn. Furthermore, the ACA funds cannot be accessed until the regular annual federal ceiling is exhausted. The federal Medicaid ceiling in fiscal year 2019 for Guam is approximately $18 million. Unfortunately, with a $13 million Medicaid budget for the 45% local match, a 55% federal match will only be about $15.9 million, and that's about $2.1 million below the federal ceiling of $18 million. that must be spent before Guam even qualifies to tap into the remaining ACA funds. The additional Medicaid funding from this bill will allow Guam to meet the federal ceiling threshold so that the remaining ACA funds will be able to be accessed. According to the PDN article referenced earlier in this statement, Ms. Terry Gumatautau, Program Administrator for the Public Health Bureau of Healthcare Financing Administration, states that Guam has an estimated $78 million left from the ACA and the funding expires on September 30th, 2019. She further stated that Public Health has tried to find different areas to pull money to make use of the federal dollars, but more funding is necessary. In addition to the $3.5 million that Bill 366-34 will provide to the Medicaid program, about approximately $60 million more in Guam local matching funds will be needed before September 30th, 2019 to access the remaining $78 million in ACA funds. GRMC urges the Guam legislature to identify an additional $60 million in local matching funds beyond the $3.5 million provided by this bill to ensure maximum utilization of all remaining ACA funds before the expenditure deadline in 2019, as well as to provide optimum funding for the Medicaid program and the island's health system as a whole. More importantly, this would position Guam to advocate effectively for a renewal and a potentially even an increase in federal grant monies. This is in turn ensuring even greater access to quality health care on Guam. Conversely, failure to do so would result in an even more severely and progressively underfunded Medicaid program to the detriment to the community, especially the most disadvantaged groups over whose welfare the government should be most concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Burns, so Bill 366 seeks to appropriate $3.5 million because based on the information we were able to get, that is the unappropriated balance in that account. But you were also, did you articulate another figure? So is this the correct balance that's in that Healthy Futures Fund that was collected in excess of what was appropriated for 2018? Or was it more?
Yes, if I could clarify that, Mr. Chairman. The number that you came up was the excess between the revenues and the expenditures in 2018. But the fund already had a carry forward balance, and that was the 10 million that I spoke of. So if you look at the balance sheet for that fund, there's 10 million, but as I further spoke, that 10 million will all be spent with 19 appropriations plus the additional appropriation of this plus the typhoon money. So we both ended up at the same place, but we're using different numbers.
But aren't we talking about two amounts here? Which you said was carried forward was the amounts not expended from the 2018 appropriations, correct? Whereas the 3.5 million that's identified in the bill is the excess that was collected from what was the projected amount for 2018. Aren't those two different amounts?
They are, but because the expenditure was very similar to that which was expected, the excess amounts to the 3.5 million. So because if the expenditure is the same and the revenues are 3.5 more than the budget, you'll end up with that 3.5 million.
So are you saying then that this 3.5 million that is identified in Bill 366 does not exist?
No, it does exist.
It does exist?
Yes, sir.
And so this is a valid appropriation?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Speaker? Senator Lee? And I also want to recognize the presence of Senator Nelson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Burns. So just to further clarify, on the second page of your testimony that you submitted, the Healthy Futures Fund had an available balance of $10.5 million at the end of 2018, correct?
Yes, Senator.
Okay, and then it continues on fiscal year 2018 revenues of $33 million.
Yes, and
So-
that's the same figure that the chairman
Right,
quoted.
just wanted to clarify, what is the balance currently in there at this time? Because this was, you said 10.5 at the end of fiscal year 18, but as of, I don't know when the last time you were able to check. So the current available balance.
Well, fiscal 18, the month of October, which would be the first month of 19, is only just finished.
Understood.
So fiscal 18 is a good number because that was at the end of September.
So you don't have any other more current number. This is the best,
Yes.
most recent balance that you
Yes.
have. Okay, thank you.
Senator Nelson? Yeah, okay. Okay, I don't have any further questions on Bill 366. We're going to go ahead then and move on to Bill 354. And Mr. Rojas, you can join us up here, the table. So 354 proposes to appropriate $700,000 for fiscal year 2019. It expected that $1 million in community contributions will be paid by GRMC. So Bill 354 intends to appropriate that these funds be transferred from GIDA to the Department of Administration and deposited as revenue into the Healthy Futures Fund, and it be appropriated to the Department of Public Health and Social Services as local matching funds for the same purpose described in Bill 366. So out of that $1 million that GRMC normally contributes to GIDA, Bill 354 proposes to transfer $700,000 of that amount and to have that appropriated to the Department of Public Health and Social Services as further local matching. So with that, we're going to go ahead and Mr. Burns, you have testimony on, oh, no, I'm sorry. Let me start with GIDA.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually, if I may, I have a combined testimony for both Bills 354 and 310.
Okay, since they're both coming from GIDA.
Yep. So I've actually requested that you actually got copies of my written testimony. I hope you have that in front of you. Essentially, I'm here to testify on both bills, and the Guam Economic Development Authority can neither support nor oppose the bills being proposed, as we do have a legal opinion from GIDA's legal counsel that these bills violate both GIDA's contractual obligations in the agreement with the Guam Regional Medical City's qualifying certificate and the separation of powers of the Organic Act of Guam. I have attached a legal opinion to this testimony for your review. Should the 34th Guam Legislature wish these funds be allocated as intended in these bills, a simple formal request can be made to the Administrator of the Guam Economic Development Authority in writing, and we will address it once received. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, well, Mr. Plinsky.
Well, assuming you will sort that all out, we will comment, and a lot of mine is very short from GRMC. For the same reasons stated in our previous testimony for 366-34, GRMC supports Bill number 354-34 because it will provide an additional $700,000 in local matching funds for the Medicaid program, which will also result in a 55% federal match of approximately $856,000 totaling an extra $1.56 million in Medicaid funding.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Burns, did you have any comments on this particular bill?
Sir, I'm deferring to Gita on these two bills.
Okay. So, Mr. Rojas, back to you. So what exactly is the contractual agreement between GIDA and GRMC?
I'm sorry, I don't actually have the actual qualifying certificate with us, but the qualifying certificate itself is a contractual agreement between the Guam Regional Medical City, the GIDA Board of Directors, and the Governor of Guam. So these are funds that are actually, we're talking about community contribution funds, which are actually paid to GIDA on an annual basis, and then the contract itself for the qualifying certificate does state that the GIDA administrator and the GIDA board does have authority as to where these funds are going.
I see. So this government gives a provides for the qualifying certificate, and GIDA gets $1 million a year, and GIDA determines how that $1 million is to be spent.
And in the qualifying certificate agreement that we have with the Guam Regional Medical City, it's to be allocated into 5 different areas. Healthcare being one, including the Medicare matching program. Healthcare itself as well, which is what we did with the $600,000 for the Guam Memorial Hospital. Public safety, higher education, economic development, and cultural projects.
Now, I understand earlier in the year when it was identified that there was these funds that GIDA had not made those allocations because those entities never requested for it. Is that correct?
No, what you're talking about is actually the University of Guam and the Guam Community College. So there was a request at one point from GRMC to be able to make allocations to the UOG and the Guam Community College, but that request never actually was formalized in writing. So there was the intent, but it was never really followed through.
I see. Okay, well, this is interesting. All right, well, Vice Speaker, Jim.
Sure. Thank you for your testimony. Has there ever been a legal determination as to whether those QC agreements that require the fees and that GIDA alone will determine use of the fees are consistent with the law authorizing QCs?
Well,
because the law authorizing QCs allows for rebatement of taxes and a significant loss to the government of Guam in general. But I don't remember the law saying that, GIDA can require these extra payments by these people who are getting QCs, and then it becomes a slush fund for GIDA.
Actually, the community contributions program has actually been in place for over 10 years. So in the qualifying certificates, they have been in place, and they're put in place within each contract.
They're there.
And each of the contracts are co-signed by the Attorney General of Guam.
All right. So does use of this money then, as requested, it doesn't contradict your agreement with them right now that it would go to health services?
In a bill service, in an actual legislative bill, it does.
What do you mean? But your agreement with them is that the money would be used for health services.
Oh, correct.
Right?
Yes.
Right. And so and this bill is asking that the money go to the Healthy Futures Fund.
Correct.
So do you find that inconsistent?
I find the bill inconsistent. In most cases, we can allocate that money with a simple letter. We don't need a bill to be able to do that.
All right. Well, what if we pass the bill and that's like, it doesn't matter to me. The organicity argument is, put that aside for a minute, and if you have the authority by your contract to put the money towards health purposes, and you find, and the Healthy Futures Fund is consistent with that, right? That's where this money is going to go, Medicaid in particular. It seems consistent, and it seems to me like I guess I'm not following where the controversy lies. Besides, if it's a power struggle, who gets to decide? to me, that just gives us more reason that if the people of Guam give up their taxes to these companies, and we ask in return for them to give us a fee, I mean, I think the people of Guam should have a say in where that fee is spent and where the priorities of the government are. Because what you're saying is that GIDA gets to decide to put it anywhere. And that by their contracts, they could have not said healthcare and they could have said any other place, right? For example, travel, things like that. And I guess that's why it just sounds concerning to me. And I don't know, but I guess I want to know from you. So is putting the money into Medicaid something GIDA would do tomorrow? You've seen this bill. It's been filed for a while now. What has GIDA done with the money?
So, actually, we do still have some funds that are actually still sitting
over
in
$1 million,
the account.
isn't it, right? Or
I do believe it's actually close to that. I'm not quite sure what that number is right now.
That's significant. And we've had all these issues with GMH. The Medicaid is a big issue. So I'm just wondering, does GIDA oppose giving the money to Medicaid? Are you able to do that in your next board meeting?
We can do that with a request, and that's all I'm saying is we don't need the legislature.
I know, but you've seen a bill. Do you need a letter?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Because you can't do it without a letter?
It's a process.
It doesn't even make sense to me that if the company wanted $100,000 to go to UOG or GCC, that you need a letter from UOG or GCC.
But it's also an audit standpoint where we actually have that backup documentation to be able to say, yes, this request came in, and that's where this money is going. Otherwise, we can actually just sit here and converse to be able to say, you know what, 20,000 of that is going to go to the Department of Chamorro Affairs. Where is that in writing? Where is that backup documentation is what our auditor is going to say. So yes, to protect GIDA in the distribution of these funds, we do require that formal request. So that's really all I'm asking this legislature to do, that if this is the intent,
so
then
that if the
make that request.
So that if the executive branch needs this money for Medicaid, then Mr. Byrne, do you have any objection to writing the letter to GIDA to get the money for Medicaid? This just makes no sense to us. It seems like, I don't know. I'm going to leave it there. But
what it comes down to, Senator, I'm sorry, is that the qualifying certificate is more than just a tax break contract. We don't just sign this qualifying certificate with companies that are going to be creating these businesses and investing $200+ million into this economy just to be able to give them a tax break. That's not what we do. The benefits for each one of these qualifying certificates are the numbers of jobs that actually happen, the number of purchases that they make from local companies as well. So the amount that we give them in tax breaks and tax credits are multiplied exponentially by the personnel that they hire, by the purchases they make, by the land that they do occupy, as well as the subsequent businesses that are indirectly associated with that business as well. And that's what's weighed with qualifying certificates and the companies and the beneficiaries that we give them.
So what's
that
got to do with this?
The idea that we have these qualifying certificates and all we're doing is giving these tax breaks to these companies just because.
No, I'm saying we're doing this, and in return, GIDA's taking the money for fees. We're giving them a break in taxes, but somewhere down this process, GIDA keeps the money in the form of fees and gets to use it however they want, instead of keeping it in the government's coffers as taxes and being distributed in the priorities of the entire government of Guam. They get distributed in a way that's just very particular to what GIDA has determined with these companies to be the priority. But in this case, that's almost moot, because these companies have agreed that the priorities in Guam are health care, and this bill is asking that you put the money towards Medicaid. So I just think it should be a very simple
request. That's all it is, a very simple request.
Well, it's silly to me. If GIDA can't see that the money's needed for Medicaid after all that public health, Department of Administration has said, it just makes zero sense.
And we are not arguing that it's not a good use of these funds. But we also need to say that we have not, it's not that we have not given health care $0 out of all of this that we've actually collected from GRMC. Again, $600,000 in equipment was purchased for GMH because they made the request.
Yes, and I recall that took a very long time while we were, listening to GMH day after day, clamoring for funds, for very, very critical needs. And so I just think GIDA could be a little bit more in line with what, the rest of the government's trying to do. Is if we're going to get this money to Medicaid or get it to healthcare, then let's get it there as fast as possible.
And we do work as quickly as possible. What took so long is the procurement process that GMH had to go through to be able to procure those equipment and supplies.
All right, thank you. Senator Lee?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, gentlemen. I think just kind of in line with what the Vice Speaker was saying, what the Acting Speaker was saying, is we have a communication issue. It's my understanding that GRMC has made recommendations, and GIDA has chosen to keep 90% of those funds, those community contributions, that GRMC has already said should go to these priority areas. So I think we're very clear on this.
Actually,
One
Senator,
of the bills,
we're not clear because it hasn't
I'm sorry,
been 90%.
I'm still speaking, Mr. Rojas.
Oh.
One of the bills that I introduced was introduced in July of 2018. So almost 4 months has gone by, and we haven't received any communication from GIDA with regard to these bills that, a letter would have been sufficient. So it's really discouraging to me, it's really troubling to me that our community is kind of, we have these resources that are available, and it's just not going to these priority areas. It's very, very disappointing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Nelson? Okay. Well, thank you very much for the testimonies, and I'm going to be real frank. I think that your testimony today from GIDA and your basically your performance here today was very disappointing. I can't help but sense the, this arrogance that's coming from you as a representative of GIDA. So we'll just leave it at that. Take it for what it's worth. But I'm really disappointed in you, Jay. We're going to move on to Bill 362. I'm sorry. Bill 310, which is the same thing. What I'm going to ask the representative, ma'am, you're from the Child Protective Service. Were you going to give testimony? I'm sorry, I can't hear you. You're going to provide written testimony? Oh, okay. All right. Okay. That's Ms. Linda Rodriguez. You're with the Child Protective Service. Okay. Right. And of course, public health is in support of the bill. I imagine GIDA is going to take the same position on the bill. In fact, you did say you provide your testimony, your comments was on both 354 and 310. Mr. Plinsky, you want to go ahead and give your comments on?
Thank you, Chairman. Also very brief, and it's related to our prior testimony for Bill 366-34. Although the Department of Public Health and Social Services Child Protective Services Division provides critical services to our community, GRMC believes that it is in Guam's best interest at this time to prioritize funding the Medicaid program, as this would benefit the larger population as well as provide access to incremental federal matching funds. In this case, the $300,000 in local Medicaid match would yield an additional $367,000 in federal funding, generating a total of $667,000 in much-needed healthcare resources. while helping maximize the remaining ACA funds. Therefore, GRMC does not support Bill 310-34.
And I'm sorry, I should have given the opportunity to the sponsor of the bill to introduce the bill. So I apologize, Senator Lee. Go ahead and.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to begin by thanking you for agreeing to hear this bill. It was bill number 310-34, was introduced in July of this year. And I also want to thank our stakeholders for their support. My proposal to appropriate $300,000 to the Department of Public Health and Social Services for the sole purpose of funding the Child Protective Services Division and the program. Mr. Chair, we're here today because we can all agree that nothing is more important than protecting our children. As a mother, I'd really stop at nothing to keep my girls safe, and almost every parent I know feels the same way. But what if the ones who should be protecting their children are putting them in danger instead? Who looks after the kids without good parents or guardians? In the last year alone, over 2,000 child abuse and neglect cases were referred to Child Protective Services right here on Guam. That's more than 5 children every day that were either sexually assaulted, physically neglected, or outright abused here in our homes, in our villages. Recognizing that this is unacceptable, the legislature held a meeting earlier this year to discuss strategies to stem the tide of abuse on Guam. While CPS has done their best with the limited resources available, one issue became clear. The men and women on our front lines are overrun and underfunded. For example, the Bureau of Social Services and Administration's BOSA investigations unit needs about 10 social workers just to maintain the current caseload. Their unit currently can only afford 6. That is why I teamed up with the women of the Guam legislature to introduce Bill 310-34. And I want to thank Senator Mary Camacho Torres, Senator Talina Nelson, Senator Luis B. Muña, and our acting speaker, Therese Terlahi, for their support. Bill 310 does 2 things. First, it recognizes that fiscally challenging times don't give us an excuse to abandon our kids when they need us the most. By utilizing funding from the Guam Economic Development Authority's QC contributions, the bill funds a long-standing priority without taking additional money from taxpayers. Secondly, and more importantly, the measure gives CPS the funding to hire 3 to 5 additional social workers, a figure that was provided by BOSA to get them the help that they need right now. To ensure that we hear from our community experts and stakeholders, I've asked that the committee invite CPS, and I thank them for being here today, as well as representatives from Guam Foster Care Community, Catholic Social Services, and members of the National Association of Social Workers, and various other nonprofits to present their testimony and provide us written testimony for this hearing. To those who are in attendance and those who aren't able to make it today because they're out doing God's work, I want to thank you for your critical service that you provide to our community every single day. You are our everyday heroes, and I look forward to your much-needed feedback and testimony. I also want to thank Gita, who submitted testimony on this measure. After keeping 90% of the cash that they received from QCs in the last 5 years, I think that they can agree with us that the men and women of CPS need it right now. Mr. Chairman, Domestic Violence Awareness Month may have come to an end, but our work is far from over. If we all can say that we care about life, then we need to be consistent about caring for the lives of our children right now. One case of child abuse, neglect, or death on Guam is one too many. Siduas Masi.
Thank you very much, Senator. Any of the other senators have any questions?
Good afternoon. It's been a hectic week. So I just wanted to, I heard that you do not support Bill 310. And I'm sorry if you stated the reason why in the beginning, but could you please just explain a little bit?
Senator Biscoe-Lee, we think it's a great bill. The only thing that would prevent us from at this, it's the year that we're in, which is 2019, the year that the Affordable Care Act funds expire. And what we're saying is even with the help of Bill 366-34, we need 60 more million local funds before that money runs out, or we have to hand it back to the federal government right when we're trying to claim we need more help. It will be a very difficult task to go to the feds and tell them we need more Medicaid funding when we're handing back millions and millions of dollars. So all we're saying is in this particular year, fiscal year 2019, it's more of an all hands on deck. If you can find any local resources anywhere, can you look at putting it into the Medicaid program? One, because you're going to get a 55% minimum match, because if it goes to CHIP, it's like a 91.5% match. And if it goes to the childless adult, Ed would be better at explaining it, it's about a 80% match. So you're going to get a very much more, a return on your investment. And the key thing is, let's try to spend those funds that are sitting waiting for us in 2019 before they expire. After 2019, if we were in 2020, I think we'd be supporting this bill.
Okay, thank you very much. And Mr. Rojas, without any hostility, I do have a question for you. Since your concern is the organicity of the bill, the previous bill that we discussed, can we get a commitment that you will move this money to, to the Medicaid program? Because you simply said that you just needed a letter of request for auditing purposes. So I just want to see that, is that all we need and we can move this money forward, or is it because you have another agenda for the money that is there?
There's no other agenda, Senator. And essentially, again, it's the process that we have with the community contributions. If we get the requests, then yes, I actually approve it, but then it does go to the board for ultimate approval. Okay. So that's as simple and as easy as it is.
Okay, but you do agree that, do you agree that this money should be put in the Medicaid?
I agree that it is a valid use of the funds. Unfortunately, what I don't agree with is a bill measure to be able to do it, and that's what I can't agree to because of organicity.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
For the record, I'd just like to, with Jay, I know we did submit, and maybe he's clarifying, the request must come from the organization that wants the money, because we did make the request in writing as a donor facility. Our request was basically saying, can you please, and we asked for $250,000 to go to GMH, I believe for equipment and supplies, $100,000 to the UOG, and $100,000 to GCC, and then we said all remaining funds from what we've paid you and moving forward into, to Medicaid, because of the critical nature of the ACA funding running out. So I think we have a written, request, but maybe what he's saying is the request needs to come from the one who wants the money rather than one who donated the money.
So Mr. Burns, can we get a commitment from you, because it seems that DOA will be receiving this money, can we get a commitment from you to push this request forward so that we can bring this appropriation or request to fruition?
Well, I think, Senator, you're talking about two separate requests, one for Medicaid and one for the Child Protective Services bill, or are you just talking about the Medicaid one?
Specifically for Medicaid, but nothing is stopping you to put in a request with Child Protective Services bill, although I do understand your stance.
We don't have any authority. We just get to make requests, but, Gita can overrule our request.
Sure.
Yeah, DOA can certainly submit a request for GIDA's consideration, but Senators, please, we will need the second part of the bill, which would appropriate the money from the Healthy Futures Fund for that purpose.
All right. Thank you, Mr. So you're going to resend the request today, right? I think it's just a simple letter of the... similar writing, send it to Gita today so we can get this money moved?
I'm sorry, are you requesting DOA send the request for
Yeah,
the?
yeah.
That's up to him.
Yes?
Yes, that's what I'm
can-
asking him.
We will submit a request for...
And when do you
Gita's
meet, Mr. Rojas? When does the
consideration.
board meet to discern?
I believe our next meeting would be in November, so I think we're still looking at a good quorum date.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mr. Burns, I know you were in support of this bill, but do you agree that if you had to request that the money go anywhere, that this is where you would request it go to Medicaid right now?
I think my testimony, Senator, indicated that I'm concerned about paying Medicaid. You know, at the end of 18, when effectively we had run out of appropriations and we've got this carryover, I and mostly my staff was on the end of numerous telephone calls from providers saying, when are we going to get paid? So, in the interests of paying the providers, as I also indicated, I think it would be helpful to get as much money into Medicaid as possible. And as Mr. Plinsky says, it maximizes the amount of federal matching also that's available. Obviously, I don't think we're going to get to 60 million because that's a large percentage of the budget. And I'm sure the federal government, you know, in setting up this fund like 5 years ago, probably erred on the side of allocating more rather than less money, because the other way around, had we run out of federal funds in the middle of the program, that would have been even worse.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Rojas, who created the Guam Economic Development Authority?
It was created by enabling legislation for the legislature.
The Guam legislature. And who created the qualifying certificate statute?
Same thing, by statute with the legislature.
I have a question for you, and I want to know, have any, either GRMC or any other company QC's community contributions, has any of that money been used for travel expenses, per diem, or anything related to travel?
If monies are kept within GIDA's general budget for operations, we do not track and decipher whether it's a community contribution or bond fees or real property.
So there's a good chance that some of that money has been used for travel?
It's a possibility, yes.
Okay.
But I can't speak for any time besides my term as administrator.
Okay, and who wrote the letter requesting that that money be used for travel? You said that we need to request a letter from you in writing for this money to be used. And so I'm asking you, who requested that money be used for travel?
It's actually done by board approval, and that's actually during our budget process where the board says how much would be taken from each QC and allocated to GIDA's operations.
Right, but I'm just trying to understand your process. So you told me, or you explained to the committee that a request needed to be made in writing in order for the board to even consider or approve it. So who made the request for that money to be used for travel?
Again, that money was done during the budget approval process, so there was no letter, and it was just with discussions.
So no letter needed when it's something that the GIDA administrator wants to be done.
I'm sorry. It's something that discussions with the board had actually made those allocations. So it's not just that I say, here's how much we're getting this year, and this is how much we're taking. I do not have that full authority. I have a board that I report to.
But there were no written letters of request asking for that money be used for travel?
No. Nor would it be
no
an
need,
audit,
right?
nor would it be an audit requirement.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Are there any further questions on Bill 310? None? All right. So at this time, then, we're going to recess until 3 p.m. And thank you very much, Mr. Burns, Mr. Rojas, and Mr. Plinsky. We'll come back at 3 o'clock to hear bills 32-34, Bill 362, Bill 350, and Bill 335. So we're in recess at this time.